So we're back with hour 2. We're going to do some more work with APIs. We've done a really simple one. Just before we move into Recaptcha, I just want to show you an example of what this might look like in a kind of a large scale. So this is kind of this diagram's a few years old. This is describing a large online application that was designed for CP Rail, for Canada Pacific Rail, for them to manage their all of their trains in an online application. So you can see here here are all of the different pieces of the application. So these are all different products, and they all needed to integrate together and share data. So some of these were for user management. This application was for security. One of them was for auditing. We had 3 different databases. This was a scaling product that would enable to scale up more server resources or scale them down. You know, we had logging and monitoring. So very little of this was actually custom code written for the application. Only one piece of this was actually the web application. And all these other components were various pieces of software, many of which are very expensive, that the client, that Canada Pacific already owned. But in order for this application to work, all of these different pieces had to be able to talk together. So everywhere you see these arrows, those arrows in every case represent an API that one application needs to communicate with another one, and they need to exchange data. Okay. Another common business scenario where we get into working with APIs is for e-commerce. If you think about a typical website that sells products online, very typically, you know, I might have a store where I'm selling products, but very often I don't make those products. I have suppliers that make different products for me. So let's think about how this works. Let's say I sell, you know, 100 different products, and I have 5 different companies that supply those products. Each of them sell me 20 different products in my inventory. If Artem comes on my website, purchases a product from me, okay, I can build a website and save that to my database. That's no problem. The question is, if Omar, I need you to build that product and ship it, right? You have your own database, your own system. How am I going to get that product from my database into yours so that you know you need to produce that product and ship it to Artem's address, right? That's a very common scenario where I have data in my database and somebody else is going to need it in their database. So how would an API help us? How would we use an API in that case?
Usually convert data, you know, let's say some of them sending JSON and other side using XML. You know, you change to use simplified data that other servers can understand. You're trying to find a common data.
Absolutely. So that's one thing for sure we need. Maybe I've built my web application using PHP, and Omar's system is using ASP.NET and C#. So the first thing we have to agree on is what is the common language that we're going to exchange the data in. And Asat, you mentioned the 2 common ones. We have JSON, which you guys are already talked about with Tom, and we have XML. XML is the old standard. We used to use XML, so APIs I developed 7, 8 years ago, we would use XML to send that data from one system to another. Now, the current standard for APIs is JSON, so it's great that you guys are already getting a taste of working with JSON in Tom's class. There are still some APIs out there that actually let you choose. For example, if you want to, like Canada Post has a shipping rate API. So I want to know or program into my application how much it's going to cost to ship something from this postal code to this postal code. In Canada Post, you call their API and you give them the 2 postal codes and the weight of the package, and they will tell you how much it's going to cost to ship that. And they'll actually give you a choice. Do you want XML, which would look like this, or do you want JSON, which would look like this? Why do you suppose JSON might be So JSON's kind of overtaken XML as the new standard for APIs. Why do you suppose JSON is now more popular than XML if you kind of look at, so this is the same data represented in two different formats. Chad, what do you think?
Easier to modify. You can read it easier to modify it than you can put that XML.
It's much more readable, absolutely. Big benefit.
Closer to CSS style.
Yep, yeah, whereas this looks more like HTML, this looks more like, yep, CSS or JavaScript syntax because it is JavaScript. Any other reasons you could think of? Look carefully. Let's look at the first name section. So here we have first name colon John. Here we have first name John and first name. There's a benefit to this format here, a very practical functional benefit, and there's a big disadvantage here.
Although it looks like more text because it's separated more, it's kind of less because you have to close every table. And open it.
That's right. There's actually more text here because we have to repeat every attribute twice, the opening and the closing. So this is one small file, but this is actually much less text. Just having the brackets is a lot less than having the closing tags. So if we have lots of records that we're transporting, let's say we're transporting a list of orders for the day and there's 10,000 orders. Well, the JSON version the JSON. And if it's smaller, it's also going to use less bandwidth, which is going to reduce our hosting costs. Okay? So because JSON is easier to read, it's smaller, it's more lightweight, and it's faster, for all those reasons, it's become the standard. So you will still see APIs out there that use XML, but they're phasing out, and more things are JSON. So you guys have learned a little bit of how to work with JSON on the front end. Well, that's great knowledge because when we use Google's Recaptcha API in version 2, it's all based on, you guessed it, JSON. When we send a Recaptcha request to Google and ask them to verify it, what they're going to send us back is a JSON object for us to read. Okay. And in my scenario that I gave of our e-commerce site, Artem buys something for me, I need to send it to Omar. Well, what Omar is going to do is he's going to build an API, or his company will build an API that accepts an order like this in JSON format. Customer name, customer address, product quantity, and I'm going to send that to your API, which you can save to your database. You can make the product and ship it out. And you'll probably send a JSON response back to me saying, yes, we got the order okay. And when you ship it, hey, here's the tracking number that I can put on my website. So that kind of integration is very common, and that's often where we wind up building our APIs and using JSON. So we're going to want to modify our register form. We're going to want a Recaptcha code to appear here. And then we need to modify our save page so that before we save a new user to the database, we're going to have to send that Recaptcha off to Google and get back their response in JSON, which will tell us whether the user completed the CAPTCHA properly or not. So where do we need to go? Well, we need to go to Google. If I just do a quick search on Recaptcha, and I want you to do the same. And the Recaptcha site will come up here. Recaptcha, easy on humans, hard on bots. So it's google.com/Recaptcha. So let's go there. We know we want to use the API, but now we need to read how do we use it. We need to read through their documents and figure this out. So this is version 2, right? You've probably seen this. It gives you this little, and all we now have to do is check it. What did the old version of Recaptcha look like? We still see it. There are still websites that use the old one.
Little pictures or something that say How many trees?
That's the new one. So the old one was where we had letters or numbers. And do you know where those letters and numbers actually came from in the old version?
It was like old books that were hard to read and stuff, so they put it there, had people try and figure it out.
That's right. So they took old texts that were scanned, and when you were typing in a word, you were confirming what that word was. If they presented that same word to enough people, and enough people typed it in the same way, they would know what it is. Because when it was scanned from old text, many times the words were blurry. What about when you got numbers? Where did the numbers come from? And how did Google use the numbers? Yeah, they were usually house numbers. Why would Google want you to verify house numbers? Yeah, for what Google feature? Yeah, for Google Street View, right? They would give you house numbers that they weren't sure because they were taken on an angle and maybe they weren't sure of the number. So they gave that to you as a CAPTCHA so we could confirm the number and they could get their street views more accurate when someone typed in that street number. So it's actually doing two things at once. And so that was in version 1. They've upgraded to version 2 now. So this is what we want to have appearing. Where should it go on our form? Where do we want that little reCAPTCHA to appear? Yeah, maybe after our confirmed password, but before the register. We'll get Google to generate that. Okay. So we've got to actually read the documentation. So I'll go to resources. Actually, sorry, I guess I should go back. The first thing we need, I'll click on the Get ReCAPTCHA. Now I'm signed into my Google account. The first thing that normally you would need to do, I've done this step in this case, you have to generate a Recaptcha API key. So any website can use it, but you have to register a key for the domain you want to use. So I've already generated an API Recaptcha key for the computerstudy.es domain. So you can go ahead and also generate your own key for that domain if you want, but you don't have to. I've put the key values we need on Blackboard. But if you're building your own website, okay, so if you're building tedfoss.ca and you want Recaptcha, you'll need to go here, put in that domain. So here's how we do it. It says register a new site. So you just give the site a name and you put in the domain name. Click register, and Google will generate 2 keys. What they call a site key, which is public. That'll go in our HTML, and it'll be visible in our form if someone views the source. And then there's a private or a site key that will go on our save page, and we'll need to provide that value when we ask Google to verify the CAPTCHA. So I've already done this. If I click on, so it actually gives me these keys. There's the public or site key, and there's the private one. These values are on Blackboard. We'll use them in a bit. Okay, so again, you can generate your own. And by default, it always works on localhost. Just prints a little red message below the CAPTCHA saying running on localhost, which is fine. Right. So normally we would have to generate those keys. I did it for you, so we can skip this step. So now I'm going to go to the resources section, which is the documentation. So normally we'd kind of be reading through this stuff. I'm going to click on the guide. So here is their documentation that will tell us how do we display a CAPTCHA and then how do we verify the user's response. And you'll notice here's a really weird thing. Version 1, which is old, and version 2, which is new. We're going to use version 2, which is the checkbox. Version 1 is the old scrambled text or house numbers. What's strange is if we look here, there's a link that says PHP plugin for the old version. And if you click it, now they say don't use this version, right, in red. If we use this, they actually give us all of the PHP code we need, both to display the CAPTCHA on our form and then to test on the server. So they've actually given us the PHP code, which is great. All we have to do is download this file for version 1. You download this PHP file, We call require once on our form, and we copy and paste the code. So using the old version is really easy. For some bizarre reason in the new version, they didn't write code samples in different languages. They only show us what the JSON looks like, and we have to write all the code ourselves. I don't know why nobody's bothered. I keep thinking I should take the code we're going to write and send it to Google and say, hey, publish it as PHP documentation and give me the credit. I haven't done it yet. It's on my list of things to do. Okay. So let's go back. So the first thing we need to do, I'm going to click on under version 2, displaying the widget. So there's a few different ways to do it. We're just going to do the simple way, which is their first option, automatically render the widget. So as soon as our register form loads, we want to call Google and generate the Recaptcha on our page. So this part is just copy and paste still. So the first thing we need to do on our register page is we need to copy this JavaScript link. So it's a link to Google's JavaScript called recaptcha/api.js. So this line I have highlighted, we're going to copy that. We don't need this for every page on our site. We really only need it on the register page. So I'm just going to paste it down at the bottom of my register.php. So I'll open up register. And as Jacob suggested, we want this to appear, actually, sorry, this is just our script link. So I'll just paste that in. We're linking to the Recaptcha API JavaScript. So I'll just put that down below my form, but above my footer. So we have 2 lines to copy and paste from Google. That was the first one, paste in the JavaScript link. The second thing, it tells us we need a div with a class of g-recaptcha. And then we have to put in our site key. So I'm going to copy this div with a class of g-recaptcha. Let's copy that. And we'll paste that into our form where you said it should go, below the confirm password div, but above the button. So I'll just put in the Recaptcha right here. So I'll save my page. So the line in blue is where I've just pasted it exactly, no changes, pasted exactly what Google has. So I've added line 23 and I've added line 31. So let's go and look at our form. Okay, so it's trying to load the Recaptcha, but we have a message saying invalid site key. So how do we fix that error? Yeah, go to Blackboard, and about partway down on lesson 12, here are the values. So this value on our form, we need the site key. So this is the second one. Just copy that. And in that div tag where it says your site key, take out your site key and paste this in instead. Not the secret key, but the site key. So right here where it says your site key, I'm just going to paste in the site key that I generated for computer studies. So that's in the data site key attribute of that div tag. So now I get the CAPTCHA. Because I'm working on my local server, I get this message saying that the Recaptcha is running on localhost, which is fine. If I upload it to the DreamHost server, that little red message will go away. If you have your own domain and you upload it, you're going to get invalid site key because this key only runs on localhost or on computer studies. So if you're running on your own domain name, you have to generate your own key. So the front end part, the easy part's done. That's all we have to do on the register form to make this show up. I can upload it to the server. So if I put it on DreamHost, well, actually, I'll just load my Monday one. When I upload it to DreamHost, that little message that says running on localhost, it goes away. That's just kind of a warning. So we added line 23 and put in our site key, and we added this link to the Google JavaScript. So we're just copying and pasting three elements into our page. Should be all of this necessary. Are there any questions so far? Anybody confused or have a question before we move on?
From where you get the site key?
You get the site key from the Recaptcha site. So, well, I generated it on the, you can get it from here. I put it on Blackboard, but how did I get that? Do you want me to show that again? Okay, no problem. So I'll go back to Recaptcha. So the first thing you need to, so let's say you're building your own website. Okay, so you have your own domain and you want to use Recaptcha. You need to go to Recaptcha, go to the Google site, you click on Get Recaptcha. And it will take you to this screen, Manage Your Keys. Okay. So if I click Register, it will generate, so I'll do this, I can delete it. So when I click Register this domain, it shows me, right? Here's the site key, and here's the secret key. Okay, and then it gives you the code exactly, the JavaScript and the div, you can paste it into your form from here. Okay. And then the server side stuff though is more involved because we're gonna have to write a bunch of PHP code to send the response to Google and then read back the JSON, read the JSON that we get back. Okay, so this is the first step for every website you do, you generate the keys this way. Okay, make sense? Okay. So I can delete that one. Okay, so now I need to go back to the resources. So we've done the first part, which is displaying the widget. So that was pretty easy. Copy and paste a few lines of code into our form and we have the Recaptcha showing up. But our Recaptcha doesn't do anything yet, right? We can fill out our form. So if I go here and fill it out, I can keep that box unchecked and it still let me sign up. So that's no good, right? We've only done half the job. Displaying the widget's not enough. We have to actually check whether the user checked it off correctly or not. Okay, so this page, we're gonna need to write a bunch of code to do it. So now I'm going to click on this section, verifying the user response. This is the part that I wish they had given us a PHP code sample for. They haven't, so I'm just going to kind of lead you through it. So it says this will tell us how to verify the user response. When a user solves it, meaning they've checked off the box, or Chad, as you suggested, occasionally, I think randomly like after the reCAPTCHA is displayed on your domain so many times, rather than giving a checkbox, it presents you a bunch of pictures, and it'll say like, it'll give you a grid of pictures. It'll say,
The other day, yeah, it was,
what did it say?
match the picture to have trees.
Right, I got one when I was doing in class on Monday. Find all the pictures that have displayed bodies of water or cakes or things like that. I don't know if it's when it's multiple requests from the same IP or it's just random. I don't know how exactly the API works, that occasionally, rather than giving you a checkbox, it gives you a series of pictures to identify. Not exactly sure. In any case, once you solve it, the API actually generates a field called G-Recaptcha-Response, which goes into our HTML. We can't control it. The JavaScript generates that behind the scenes for us and submits that to Google. So the easiest way is to then interpret the G-Recaptcha response as part of the post collection. When our form is posted, we now have a field called G-Recaptcha response, and we'll need to do something with that value. So this explains using Ajax, which we're not going to do. It's a bit more complicated. You could certainly try on your own to do it on the front end with Ajax. We're going to do it on the server. So what we need to do is we need to make a call. We need to invoke this URL, google.com/recaptcha/API/site verify. We don't want to take our user to that page because we need them to be on our save registration page. So what we need to do is we need to make a hidden call in the background. We need to send information to that URL without actually taking the user to that page in their browser. And we have a way to do this in PHP. When we call that URL, we need to make sure that we send a post request, and we need to send two values. Our secret key value needs to be included, and we need to send the response. That's this G-Recaptcha response value. So those two things need to get sent to Google, to this URL. And that URL is going to send us back a response that'll tell us if the reCAPTCHA is okay or not okay. The response is going to be a JSON object. So here's what it's going to look like. This is what we send to Google. And this is typically how APIs are documented, because it's usually a two-way communication. One application sends information to another one, and that other one sends back a response. So again, if we go back to our e-commerce example, Omar, if you built an API, you would have to document it. You'd have to give me the URL. Where do I send orders? And you would have to define, what does an order look like? What are all the fields and all of the names? So when I send an order, it matches the format that your application wants. Exactly, right? If you use F name, I can't send you first name. I have to send you F name in exactly how you want it. And then you're going to send something back to me. Maybe you're going to send me an order number and an okay or an error back as a JSON object. So here's what reCAPTCHA sends us. It sends us a value called success that'll have one of two possible values, true or false. Pretty simple. It'll send us back the timestamp. It'll send us back the host name. And if success evaluates to false, it will also send us back an array with any error messages. So if Google gives us back a false, we can read the JSON and figure out why the reCAPTCHA was invalid. We don't really care about these things on our registration page. All we care about is this. If success is false, then on our save page, we're going to set OK to false so the user doesn't get saved. We'll print a message suggesting that the reCAPTCHA is invalid, and we'll make them fill it out again. If we get a success response, that means they got a reCAPTCHA properly, they're a valid user, so we can add their account to our database. So this is what we get back. So we're going to get a JSON object that we're going to have to convert into a string so we can read out the success value that we got back. So this is what we're going to do. So open up your Save Registration page. And after this section, after we check the username, password, and the passwords match, this is where we're going to check the reCAPTCHA. So what we want to do, as I said, we don't want to take this page off to Google. We just want to send a request to Google and get a response back. We want to stay on this page. So there's a library available in PHP that lets us do this. It lets us call it lets us call a URL and get a response back without us actually having to take the user off to that page in their browser. So that library is called curl. CURL. So it lets us make a URL request to any URL. We can even run this from the command prompt if we want to test things out. So Omar, if you build an API and give me a URL, I could go to my command prompt and I could send requests to it using curl. It works on the command prompt if we install it. And it's built into PHP. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up a curl request call Recaptcha API. So I'm going to create just a variable. I'll call it CH, which stands for curl handler. And we'll call a built-in function in PHP curl_init. So let's initialize a new curl handler so we can call this remote URL. We'll need to set a whole bunch of options on our curl handler. What do you suppose would be the first piece of information we want to supply? Devin? Yeah, what URL is this curl handler going to call? So if we're going to call the function, has a function curl_set_opt, meaning set option. We're going to call this function a number of times so we can set a bunch of options. So we'll take our curl handler variable and we're going to set, this is built into PHP, there's a curl opt URL value. So now we need to go to the Google documentation and we need to copy and paste the URL of their API. So, and put it inside the quotes where my cursor is flashing. So we're going to set the URL option equal to, and go back to reCAPTCHA. Here's the URL. So I need to copy that. So our page knows that's where we're going to make a request. So I'll just paste that in here. So that's pretty much makes sense that that's going to be the first parameter. We're going to set some other options too. Next option we want to set on our curl handler, because we want the page to stay on this URL, we don't want our user to leave and go to Google. We want them to stay here. There's an option called return transfer, which basically means keep the user here. So we'll want to set that option and set it to true. We're not going to leave and go to Google. We're calling Google, but we're staying here. So the next option is called curl opt underscore return transfer, and we're going to set that value to true. So these are just built-in option names for the curl library. The Google documentation also said that the method we need to use is post. It's not expecting a GET request, it's expecting a POST request. So we'll need to specify that as one of our options as well. So there's an option here, curl opt underscore post. We're going to set that one to true. Because if I go back to the Recaptcha docs, method post. So our request should also set post equal to true. So this is setting it up. The next thing we need to do is we now need to add our values. We don't want to make an empty post. We actually have to send Google the values that it's requiring. Well, what values is it requiring? Well, the documentation tells us we need a parameter called secret and a parameter called response. So the secret is our secret key, which I generated, and it's on Blackboard. We'll copy and paste it from Blackboard in a minute. And the response is this post field called G-Recaptcha response. So we need to set add the values to our curl request. So I'm going to create an array, an empty array. And then we're going to add our secret key and our CAPTCHA response into the array. And then we'll add the array as another option of our curl handler. And then we can execute the handler and read back what we get from Google. Because, very good question. There's an option here. There's an option here called curl opt post fields. So that's just built into the curl library. If we want to send values, we send it as an array. We send the whole array at once rather than sending one value at a time. So we'll use that curl opt post fields in a minute. Good question. We're going to create a value in our array called secret, and it has to be called secret all lowercase, because that's exactly what Google's expecting. Equals, now we need to get the site key. Sorry, our secret key. So I'm going to go to Blackboard, and I'm going to copy my secret key value that starts with a 6 and ends with a lowercase z. So we'll copy this value and paste it in. If you've generated your own secret key, it would go here. So that's one of the two values we need to send Google. Was this one, a value called secret. Now we need to send them a value, a field in the array called response. We'll add a second value into our array called response. And this will come from the hidden field Recaptcha generates in the post, which is G Recaptcha response. And it has to be named like this exactly. We have no control over this. This is what the API creates. a field called G-Recaptcha-Response. And now we're going to add this array with these two values to our post fields. I know this is all new, but it may be a little bit confusing. That's okay. Most things are a bit confusing the first time we do them. So we're going to set our curl opt underscore post fields. And now we'll add our little array with two values.
Sorry, what is this step?
So first we're populating an array, then we're including the array in our curl request. We're not just making an empty call to the API. We need to call that URL, but we also need to send the secret and captcha response to Google. Just like, again, if we go back to our e-commerce example, if you build an order API, it's not enough for me just to send a request to your URL. You need all the data about that order. Who's the customer? What's the product? What's the address? Right? I have to include the data with my request. So that's what we're doing here. We're creating an array that holds all the values that Google needs, and then we're appending that data into our request. Otherwise, we would just be sending them a blank request. So now our curl request is ready for us to execute. So let's execute the curl request and store the result that Google returns. So I'll create a variable just called maybe result. And to execute my request, we call curl exec and pass in our curl object that has all of the options set. The right URL, the right method that we're doing a post, and here's all the data we've sent to Google. So line 41 actually calls their API and stores the JSON object that we get back into a variable called a result. So this result is a JSON object that looks like this. This is what we're going to get back from Google. So now we have JSON. The last thing we need to do, well, we need to do two more steps. And I know normally I like to run the code one bit at a time, but really we kind of have to do this whole process. We can't kind of partly run this one. So this will execute our request. Actually, here's what I'm going to do just to test it out. You don't have to do this with yours, just to see where we're at so far. I'm just going to try to print out our result, see what we get, and I'll say OK is false because I don't want to go ahead and save the new user. I'm just going to put this in temporarily. You don't need to do this in yours. I'm going to try mine and we'll see what happens. If I save mine and fill it out now, first I'll leave the CAPTCHA blank. Notice when I try to echo out a JSON object, there's nothing here. Even if I go back, PHP, we can't print out that JSON object. So what we're going to have to do is convert this, decode it from JSON to a regular array in PHP, and then we can access the success value from that array. So rather than echoing out my result, I'll take that out. I'm going to create a result array. And PHP, just like, because JSON is the standard for APIs, any programming language we work with can read and write JSON. And PHP has built-in functions for converting PHP arrays to JSON or JSON objects to PHP arrays, which is really useful. So we're going to use that here. We're going to call JSON_decode. So what this wants to know is, okay, what is the JSON object we're decoding? Well, that's the result we got on the previous line, and we're just going to set it equal to true. Now we should be able to print out the success value. I'm going to just try it, and I'm going to keep OK equals false in there for now. I'm not going to save the user. I just want to see what I got back up from Google. And if I leave the box unchecked, it should print false. If I check the reCAPTCHA, it should print true if our code's working properly. So we can do the same if we were going to send JSON. So again, I'm going to come back to my example again. So I built my e-commerce site in PHP. I need to send you a JSON object with an order. I can put all the values into a PHP array, and instead of calling JSON decode, I can call JSON encode, and it will automatically convert my PHP array to JSON. Then I could submit that object to your API if you wanted JSON from me, for example. So I'll go back. Leave reCAPTCHA blank. Interesting. It printed out nothing. Let me just see if I did it right. Okay. We'll try something else. We'll say if my success field does not equal true. I'm going to try this. So we're going to evaluate that if the success value in our array is not true, we'll print false. And if it is true, we'll print true. We'll see what this gives us. I'm going to leave it unchecked. So we didn't get a true back from Google in this case. So the real test is, will we get a true back from Google when I check the box?
Receive zero, like no result, no true.
Yeah. If let's say their API is offline, yeah, we would get nothing back, right? Well, that's assuming we get a response back.
Maybe we can check the if statement whether we have null result.
Well, we've missed something here, so that's where we'll read the documentation. So we get back. I also want to call, we should call here curl close. I'm just missing something which will go happened to me. Let's see. Oh, let's try this one. I'll leave this one blank. And it says, are you human? So that's good. And that one works. I think I'm going to upload this to the web server and see if it works on the server.
They're using the DreamHost stuff anyway.
Sorry?
Using the DreamHost.
Yeah, I'm using the same key.
But in your local host, the DreamHost anyway.
But the key is for the domain name that the website is running on. Well, I'll upload it and see if it makes any difference. It should run on my local host, but I'll try it on the server and see if that happens to make a difference. We'll see. Okay, so let's see what happens if we run it on DreamHost. So I'll leave it unchecked. Make it false. Oh, yes, it select all the bread. Yeah, it has to do with running on localhost, so that code works on my live server. So we're going to close our curl. We want to decode our array, our JSON object into an array, and then we need to evaluate. So in this case, we won't echo out the word false, but we'll just print a message. And in this case, we'll say OK equals false, right? We haven't generated a proper recaptcha response. So we want to toggle OK to false. I can take those lines out. If the result, if success value is true, well, our OK variable is already true, so we can save the new user. So it just won't give me a proper response on my local host. So now we have all of the code that we need to add Recaptcha into any PHP site. The only thing you'll have to change from one site to another is you'll have to generate new keys for your domain. Every domain will need its own set of site and secret keys. The rest of the code we have here, this should work with pretty much any site to tell you if the Recaptcha is valid.
Well, if you're at fault, if you're not on your local host, or sorry, if you're not connected to the web host.
Sorry?
If you're not connected to DreamHost, it'll appear as false, either way.
Yeah, when I run it on my local, it always returned false. It never gave me a true. Okay. Or let's say I mess up the secret key. So my site key, which will generate the CAPTCHA code on the form, is okay. But if I make a mistake here, let's say I put in an extra character. If I upload this, my CAPTCHA is going to display, but even after I check it, I'm going to get a false response, and I'm going to get a message from Google. If we parse the errors, it would say invalid input secret. If I upload this, that's what should happen. So when my key is incorrect, but displays okay here because my site key is fine on my form. But it still returns a false because I don't have the site key that matches the domain that I'm sending from. Okay. So that value has to be the right value. So the most common times to think about an API are: one, when you get asked to build some piece of functionality that you think probably already exists. Well, we need to do some research online. That's part of our responsibility as a developer. Is there already an API out there that does this that we could just plug into? The second time we think about APIs is when we need to get data or send data to some other application. If another application needs data from us or wants to send data to us, we're probably going to build the API, and we have to then write this kind of documentation to give to those other developers so they know how to work with our API. What are the URLs? What are the method names? What are they sending us, and what are we sending back? And in a case where we're consuming someone else's API, we have to do exactly what we've done today. Read the instructions, learn how the API works. Usually we have to generate an API key so that API knows who we are and where we're coming from, and then we have to test it out. So here's another really common example. You have an application, you have a database with a bunch of users, and there is another application that also has a list of users, and those companies are partners. So anybody who has an account here should also have an account over here. Well, the simple way to do it is we build an API in the second system. If people register in system A, it automatically will send their information and register them in system B as well. So that way they don't have to create two separate, technically they have two separate accounts, but the process only has to happen once, and their account gets transferred in JSON from one database to another one, right? So that way they can log in one place and have access to both applications rather than creating accounts again and again. Okay, so it's a very common use. I've had to do it many, many times. So I know we went a little bit over time. That's all I kind of wanted to cover for our lesson today, was to give you a taste of, so this is the easy part with APIs, the consuming end. We're just using someone else's API. So what we're going to do next week is we're going to build a simple JSON API. So let's say, we have our beer store, right? I can log in. So here would be a practical example of why we would need to build an API, right? Someone could come to our website and see our list of beers. Maybe we have somebody building a mobile app and they want to use the list of beers from our database, right? Maybe they're making like a beer rater. They want to build a mobile app. So they want to have a list of all the beers that are for sale in the beer store. They don't want to go ahead and create their own list and have to keep it up to date every time we change the prices in our store. They want to get a real-time list of beers from us. Right? We're not going to give them our database credentials and let them access our database directly, but we can build an API that they can get a list of beers by calling a URL on our page. And they could either get the whole list of beers, or maybe they could give us a beer ID or a beer name, and we would send them back the details about that one beer, right? So this would be a common scenario where we would have to build the API and document it so some other application could use our data. They can't use all the data. We're not going to let them add, edit, delete. Just like in the video, he said Facebook makes things, their programs available, but they control how we use them. When we build the API, we control what pieces of our data we're going to make available and how our consumers can use it. So next week, we're going to build a simple JSON API so a user could get a JSON object that lists either all the beers in our table, or they could pass us a beer name and we'll send them back just that one beer and include the name and path of the logo if they even want to display that logo in their application. So we'll do that next week. We'll also do a lab next week that will be kind of, the lab is a review exercise for the final exam. And we'll talk about the final exam next week as well. Okay. So now I'm going to give you the world's shortest lab. I would encourage you to do it now. It's due Friday night. It should take you 5 minutes. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. So you're,
This class early today?
yep, and that's it for today. We'll end early. I know people probably stayed up late. A lot of you working on your assignments, or those of you stuff to finish, so I will set you free early today. Okay. So here's your lab. And I'll show you a sample of what it should look like in a minute. So I want you now on your own to use the Facebook API. We're going to use the comments API to add a Facebook comment thread onto our beers page. So on this page, after the list of beers, but before the footer in here, I want to see a Facebook comment thread. Okay, I will show you, just give me a second and I'll show you an example of what this should look like.
Do we have to convert it to PHP as well?
Nope. This will be much like the first lab. Basically, you go to Facebook, you read the documents, and you copy and paste. So hang on just a second. I'll find an example of what it should look like. Just bear with me for a second.